Minister responsible for education to grace us with prayers this morning.
Shall we pray? Almighty God, from whom all wisdom and power are derived, we beseech thee so to direct and prosper the deliberations of the Legislative Assembly now assembled, that all things may be ordered upon the best and surest foundations for the glory of thy name and for the safety, honour, and welfare of the people of these islands. Bless our Sovereign Lady, Queen Elizabeth II, Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Charles, Prince of Wales, and all of the royal family. Give grace to all who exercise authority in our Commonwealth, that peace and happiness, truth and justice, religion and piety may be established amongst us. Especially we pray for the Governor of our islands, the Speaker of the Legislative Assembly, official members and ministers of Cabinet and members of the Legislative Assembly, that we may be enabled faithfully to perform the responsible duties of our high office. All this we ask for thy great name's sake. Let us say the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord bless us and keep us. The Lord make his face shine upon us and be gracious unto us. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon us and give us peace, now and always. Amen.
Please be seated.
Administration of oaths or affirmations. Oath of allegiance and due execution by Ms. Jennifer Ahorn, the Honourable Acting Deputy Governor responsible for the portfolio of civil service, to be the temporary ex officio member of the Legislative Assembly.
I'll now call upon the temporary member to be sworn in and ask her to take her seat at the clerk's dais.
I, Jennifer Margaret Ahern, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will well and truly serve Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors, and the people of the Cayman Islands in the office of Member of the Legislative Assembly. I, Jennifer Margaret Ahern, do solemnly and sincerely affirm and declare that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors according to law.
On behalf of the Honourable House, I'd like to welcome the temporary member and ask you to take your seat, please. Please be seated.
Reading by the Honourable Speaker of Messages and Announcements.
I have received apologies from the 5th elected member from the District of Georgetown, Councillor Winston Connolly. I've also received apologies for the late arrival of the Leader of the Opposition. And I'm sure that all members of the Honourable House would wish me to extend our deepest condolences to the family of the late Shinde Bawden de Costa, seeing that her family has served this country in various capacities for a number of years. Madam Clerk.
Presentation of papers and of reports. The Development and Planning Amendment Regulation 2014, to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure.
I recognize the Honourable Minister responsible for planning. Honourable Minister, before you start, if you would permit me, I meant to say, but it eluded my memory, to also welcome and acknowledge the presence of former MLA from the District of West Bay, Mrs. Daphne Orritt. We welcome you to our proceedings today, Madam. Please continue, Honourable Minister.
Thank you. Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the Development and Planning Amendment Regulations 2014.
So ordered. Does the Honourable Minister wish to speak to it?
Madam Speaker, when the time comes on the order paper for the government motion for these regulations, I will speak to them at that time. Thank you.
2015-16
I recognize, 1 minute, Madam Clerk. I got the attention of the Honourable Premier. Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I crave your indulgence to be able to read to the House a letter which I just received from the Minister for Africa, the Overseas Territories and the Caribbean, James Dudridge MP.
Honourable Premier, do you wish to lay it on the table?
Yes, Madam Speaker.
So ordered. You may now proceed.
As I said, Madam Speaker, the letter is addressed today, 26 November 2014. It's addressed to me as the Premier and Minister for Home and Community Affairs. It reads as follows. Dear Premier, thank you for your letter of 10th of November enclosing the Cayman Islands Government's Strategic Policy Statement for fiscal years 2015-16, 2016-17, and 2017-18. I know that your government has committed to make sound management of Cayman Islands public finances a top priority and congratulate you for the positive progress that you have made. I understand that the FCO's economic advisor for the Overseas Territories, Mr. Homewood, has reviewed the SPS with your officials and commend the Minister of Finance for the cooperative and positive approach it has taken in these discussions. I note that the Cayman Islands government is on track to deliver a fiscal trajectory which brings it into compliance with the FCO's borrowing guidelines by 2015-16 as outlined in the FFR. It is important that the significant progress made by the Cayman Islands government is maintained and that you continue to keep a watchful eye on public expenditure. My officials look forward to continuing to work closely with you and your team as you prepare your budget for 2015-16. I would also like to extend my personal gratitude to you for agreeing to chair the Economic Development session at the Joint Ministerial Council. I look forward to welcoming you at the JMC and discussing your plans for the Cayman Islands. James Dudridge. Madam Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to lay a copy of this on the table of this Honourable House.
(2015-16) Strategic Policy Statement to be laid on the table by the Honourable Minister of Finance and Economic Development.
I recognize the Honourable Minister responsible for Finance.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the Strategic Policy Statement. On behalf of the government, I beg to lay on the table of this Honourable House the Strategic Policy Statement of the Cayman Islands Government for the 2015-16 fiscal year ending 30th June 2015.
So ordered. Does the Honourable Minister responsible for Finance wish to speak to his statement?
Yes, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Please proceed.
Madam Speaker, the government's 2015-16 Strategic Policy Statement, which I will refer to as the SPS from here on in, which has just been tabled, outlines the government's medium-term fiscal plans, policy priorities, and broad strategic outcomes. It also establishes the government's fiscal targets for the next 3 financial years, those being 2015-16, 2016-17 and 2017-18, and will form the basis of the budget planning process for the next 3 years. Whilst the presentation of a 3-year strategic policy statement is mandated by the Public Management Finance Law, Madam Speaker, I'm not here today to speak simply about compliance with a statutory requirement, even though that may be very important. My purpose today in speaking to the SPS that has just been tabled is to demonstrate the importance of and evidence for strategic planning, which is a defining characteristic of this government, Madam Speaker. Strategic planning is essential to the success of our country and is at the core of prudent financial management. Although the wants and needs of the country are many, Madam Speaker, it remains essential for the government to engage in strategic and sound fiscal planning to ensure the sustainability of our thriving and successful economy. Madam Speaker, through the strategic planning process, the government is able to identify the needs that are most important to our community and to allocate the funds necessary to meet those needs. The process also allows us to look ahead and make provisions for the necessary investments that will take these islands to the next level. The goals of this government are to reduce the cost of doing business and to elevate the overall quality of life for Caymanians and residents alike. Madam Speaker, those being a higher standard of living, better and more affordable health care, higher academic achievement in our schools, and stronger and more competitive tourism and financial services industries. Improvement in the quality of life, Madam Speaker, comes in many forms, be it creating additional jobs and achieving full employment, be it improving the transportation network so that families can spend fewer hours sitting in traffic and more time interacting with their children, or finding ways to reduce the cost of doing business in order that we can reduce the cost of living, so that families do not have to work so many hours to meet the monthly expenses of the household. Madam Speaker, this progressive-led government is working hard to build a better community for the benefit of current and future generations. The strategic policy statement of the government sends a clear signal to citizens and residents of these islands and to the private sector that the government will not be an impediment to progress, that public finances are being restored, that public sector debt is declining, and that the government has a credible plan to move the country forward for a bigger and brighter tomorrow. Working together, Madam Speaker, we will build a stronger community with a diverse economic base where businesses and individuals can continue to thrive. Madam Speaker, this government strongly believes that the means to restore public finances and the fortunes of these islands is not just through greater taxation and bigger government. Rather, it is through sound economic policies that are conducive to economic growth and increased economic opportunities for our citizens and residents. Madam Speaker, the domestic economy continued to recover in 2013, and higher growth is expected for 2014. This is conditional on the sustained strengthening in demand for tourism services and modest growth in the financial services industry. As you know, Madam Speaker, the GDP of a country is the monetary value of all the finished goods and services produced within its borders during a specific period of time. And in this case, Madam Speaker, we are referring to that period of time as a year. It is widely regarded as a benchmark indicator for economic performance. The economic outlook for these islands over the next 3 financial years shows sustainable growth in gross domestic product, or GDP, relatively stable inflation rates, and declining unemployment. Based on the economic performance of 2013 and the first 6 months of 2014, estimated GDP for the 2013-14 fiscal year stands at 1.6%, while the forecast for 2014-15 remains at 2.1%. Madam Speaker, those growth rates are the strongest growth rates estimated so far for the country during the post-2008 global financial crisis. We have seen economic growth in the wholesale and retail trade, hotels and restaurants, transport, storage and communications, real estate, renting, business activities, and construction. Madam Speaker, over the upcoming 3 financial years, the Cayman Islands GDP is expected to grow by an average of 2.6%. It is interesting to note, Madam Speaker, that amongst economists, there is a general consensus that presently an average annual growth rate between 2.5 and 3.5% of GDP is considered respectable. Whilst the government will continue to play its part in facilitating economic growth, it is important to note that the government spending is not expected to be the sole driver for the forecasted increase in GDP. Instead, growth in the economy will rely heavily on domestic private consumption and investments, which will be primarily stimulated from construction projects, such as hotel and condominium developments, and major infrastructure ventures, including the Georgetown cruise ship berthing facility, Owen Roberts Airport terminal upgrades, the East-West Arterial Road extension, and the new solid waste management facility. Madam Speaker, where the GDP of a country is growing at a moderate but sustainable rate, and its inflation levels are kept in check, that is an excellent indicator of a thriving economy. The Consumer Price Index, which measures inflation, which represents the variation in prices paid by the typical consumers for retail goods and services, is expected to grow by an average of 2.3% in the 3-year period covered by the SPS. Madam Speaker, the unemployment rate varies with economic growth and the anticipated creation of increased employment opportunities. In the Cayman Islands, we are anticipating a reduction in the unemployment rate from 5.9% in the 2014-15 to 5.7% in 2015-16, down to 4.9% by the fiscal year 2017-18. The government, through the National Workforce Development Agency, will work to ensure that the decline in unemployment does not only relate to the aggregate workforce, but more importantly, Madam Speaker, to the Caymanian unemployment rate. We have to be clear, Madam Speaker, as to for whom we are building this country. Nevertheless, it is accepted and expected that the unemployment rate for non-nationals will also decline over the same period. Therefore, Madam Speaker, it is fair to say the Cayman Islands is currently in a sweet spot in regards to its current and forecasted GDP growth. That is a relatively low inflation with declining unemployment rates. With respect to the fiscal strategy, Madam Speaker, the government's medium-term fiscal strategy is focused on continued fiscal prudence in the public sector, the facilitation of continued private sector growth, development of key infrastructure projects, and continued investment in our people. Madam Speaker, looking at prudent fiscal management. As a result of this government's fiscal prudence, there has been no new revenue measures thus far, and it is our hope that this will remain the case during the 3-year period covered by the SPS. On the expenditure side, the cost of operating the public service is forecast to remain relatively static, with an increase of just 1% between the current 2014-15 expenditure budget and the SPS financial targets for the 2017-18 year. This forecast position does not take into account any efficiency gains which may accrue from the implementation of any accepted recommendations contained in the Project Future report, or otherwise known as the Ernst & Young report, Madam Speaker. To ensure public sector expenditures remain in check and further enhance the prudent management of public sector finances, the government will be taking steps to improve the procurement process. The Ministry of Finance and Economic Development will be leading the initiative to leverage the immense buying power of the Cayman Islands government through a centralized procurement system. To further that effort, Madam Speaker, the Ministry recently concluded the recruitment of the Director of the Central Procurement Office. Standardization in specification and policies are expected to yield numerous benefits, such as reduced costs, reduced future maintenance on vehicles, machinery and equipment, greater transparency in the procurement and in the procurement process, and greater compliance by private sector merchants wishing to do business with the government. The Ministry will now be moving swiftly to develop the policies and procedures that will be used going forward to ensure that the citizens of this country receive optimum value for every dollar that is spent. Madam Speaker, the government is working hard to keep public sector expenditures in check. Presented today is a modest, credible, and achievable plan on how this government intends to manage its affairs in the upcoming financial years. Madam Speaker, there is a clear economic and moral case for providing some relief to the civil service workers, and I'm proud to be a part of the government that has managed the financial affairs of the country in such a manner as to be able to afford to do this in the 2015-16 financial year without significantly increasing the cost of running the government. Government's budgeted net operating expenditure for the current 2014-15 financial year is $529.7 million. The expected net operating expenditure figure for 2017-18 is $535.7 million. This is a modest increase of $6 million, or 1.1% increase over a 3-year period. However, Madam Speaker, this is $30.8 million less than the actual expenditure as at the 30th of June 2013, which stood at CI $566.5 million. The government, like the private sector, is also subject to the same pressures of inflation. Therefore, the ability to keep government's expenditure more or less constant is a result of increasing efficiency. Moreover, the cost of living adjustment is offset by other areas of expenditure which show decreases over the SPS time frame, such as reduced interest costs and reductions in other executive expenses with respect to provisions established in the current 2014-15 budget that are not required to be repeated in subsequent years. Notwithstanding the planned cost of living adjustment, the government's fiscal plans show marked improvement in several key indicators of fiscal health within the public sector. Annual operating surpluses are expected to be $124.5 million in the 2015-16, 134.8 million in 2016-17, and 168.3 million in 2017-18. Over the same period, Madam Speaker, the government's net worth is expected to grow from an estimated 1.594 billion as at the 30th of June 2014 to a forecast figure of 1.948 billion as at the 30th of June 2018. This, Madam Speaker, is before the impact of the past service health care liability, which I will speak to later in this address. During the 3-year period covered by the SPS, the entire public sector will repay approximately 127.6 million in debt principal. This will reduce the public sector debt balance to a forecast amount of 509.7 million as at the 30th of June 2018. The annual interest cost on the entire public sector debt amounted to 39.2 million for the 2012-13 financial year, which coincides with the start of this government's term, Madam Speaker. As a result of the debt principal repayments, interest costs for the entire public sector is expected to fall to 28.2 million during the 2017-18 financial year. This $11 million reduction is enough to fund the entire scholarship program of the Ministry of Education, which provides increased opportunities for Caymanian students to receive tertiary education. Madam Speaker, for the 2013-14 financial year, the government had an overdraft facility, and the overdrawn balance peaked at $22.6 million on the 20th of December 2013. But this was well within the overdraft limit, Madam Speaker. On the 14th of January 2014, the government's operating bank account balances became positive and remained positive to the end of the 13-14 financial year. In contrast to the existence of an overdraft facility during the 13-14 financial year, the government will not require an overdraft facility to fund its operations during the 14-15 and subsequent financial years. This again is a result of prudent financial management, which has now placed us in a position whereby our operating cash is sufficient to fund the operations of the government throughout the entire 14-15 and subsequent financial years without the use of an overdraft facility. Therefore, there has been a significant improvement in the management of government's cash resources. Madam Speaker, as I've just outlined, the government is expected to have healthy surpluses throughout the forecast period and a significant decline in its debt balances. As is often said, Madam Speaker, cash is king. The government is also required to have sufficient cash balances to cover a minimum of 90 days of expenditure for financial years 2015-16 and onwards. For the 2015-16 financial year, it is expected that the government's cash balances will provide coverage for 96.3 days of expenditure at the measurement date of 31st of December 2015. For the financial years 2016-17 and 2017-18, the ratio is expected to be 156.1 days coverage and 202.6 days coverage, respectively. Therefore, government will comply with the 90-day minimum requirement as set out in the FFR. Government is forecast to have a total cash balance of 256.1 million at the end of the current 14-15 financial year. At the end of the 15-16 year, that balance is expected to rise to 337.8 million and then to 404.7 million at the end of the 16-17 financial year and $514.5 million by the close of the 2017-18 financial year. What that means, Madam Speaker, is that by the 30th of June 2018, if there are no natural disasters, the economy performs as expected, and we are able to contain or further reduce operating costs, the central government is forecast to have more cash in its bank accounts, that being $514.5 million, than the total outstanding debt balance of the entire public sector of $509.7 million. That will be a monumental achievement, Madam Speaker, for this country, considering where we were just a few short years ago. With respect to facilitation of private sector growth, as we all know, Madam Speaker, the private sector is the engine that drives our economy. The government will therefore ensure that measures taken will be conducive to an environment which fosters continued private sector growth and job creation locally. In the current 14-15 financial year, the government announced measures to reduce the cost of doing business for private sector businesses. These measures included a reduction in the import duty rates for licensed traders, various fee reductions for small businesses, and a reduction in the import duty rate on diesel fuel used for electricity generation. The government plans to continue these reduced rates and fee waivers as they are beneficial to the economy, and will continue to evaluate opportunities for further reductions to the cost of doing business. Madam Speaker, in addition to the measures announced in the 2014-15 budget, the government will continue to support small and medium-sized enterprises, or otherwise known as SMEs, in a targeted and cohesive manner. Internationally, it is accepted that the development of SMEs has shown the greatest potential growth for job creation, sustainable economic development, and the production of affordable goods and services. One of the biggest challenges to the development of the SMEs in the Cayman Islands is access to credit. As the government works to reduce the level of debt outstanding at the Cayman Islands Development Bank and strengthen its balance sheet, it will also seek to make continued capital injections to enable the institution to resume its role as a facilitator for the development of small and medium-sized enterprises. Madam Speaker, mistakes were made in the past which led the CIDB to the brink of bankruptcy. This government has taken a more measured approach in ensuring that the entrepreneurs have appropriate guidance and coaching through the Department of Commerce and Investment to develop their ideas. Where a business shows true potential, the CIDB will be placed in a position to provide appropriate credit facilities for the further development of that business. With respect to development and modernization of our infrastructure, the public sector capital program is set to remain modest as the government continues to improve public sector finances and reduce debt. The government's strategic plan provides for a $47 million investment in capital expenditures for the immediate 2015-16 financial year. Of this amount, approximately $20 million will provide ongoing support to statutory authorities and government-owned companies. This means the government will only have approximately $27 million available to spend on true capital projects. However, Madam Speaker, as many Caymanians will tell you, it's not what you make, it's what you make of it. Therefore, there are times when we simply have to cut our garment to suit our cloth. The government will therefore not lament the relatively small amount afforded for capital. Rather, we will focus on the most effective use of our resources. Having said that, Madam Speaker, we are therefore allocating approximately $47 million for capital investment and expenditures in the 15-16 financial year. Thereafter, we plan to allocate 57 million and 47 million respectively in fiscal years 2016-17 and 2017-18. Concentrating on the 2015-16 financial year, the SPS indicates the following allocations to government agencies. $22.6 million to the Ministry of District Administration, Tourism, and Transport. $8.8 million to the Ministry of Planning, Lands, Agriculture, Housing, and Infrastructure. $5 million to the Ministry of Education, Employment, and Gender Affairs. $3.3 million to the Ministry of Health, Sports, Youth, and Culture. $2.2 million to the Ministry of Financial Services, Commerce, and Environment. $3.5 million to the Ministry of Home and Community Affairs. $1.4 million to the Ministry of Finance and Economic Development. And $0.2 million to Judicial Administration. Madam Speaker, investment by the government in the country's infrastructure is important. As an illustration of this, the government has therefore decided to pledge a firm commitment of $15 million over 2 years, 2016-17 and 2017-18, to fast-track the redevelopment of the Owen Roberts International Airport and bring relief to the traveling public. Turning now to our debt strategy, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the government remains steadfast in its goal to significantly reduce public sector debt. In addition to the repayment of the normal principal amounts which are falling due this financial year, the government will also do an early retirement of approximately US $10 million in bonds currently held by the Cayman Islands Development Bank. Consequently, as at the 30th of June 2015, the total public sector debt balance is forecast to be $631.4 million, comprising of $523.5 million for the central government and $107.9 million for public entities. These amounts are expected to decline over the periods of the SPS to arrive at an overall public sector debt balance of $509.7 million as at the 30th of June 2018. Madam Speaker, when that target is achieved, it will represent a 35.7% decrease in public sector debt from the outstanding borrowing figure of $793.4 million recorded at the end of the 2010-2011 financial year. Madam Speaker, I am proud to say that this government has structured its affairs in a manner so that no more than 9.8% of its recurrent revenue is required to service its annual debt obligations over the SPS period, or from 2015-16 to 2017-18. A 9.8% debt servicing ratio will satisfy the PMFL requirement for the debt servicing ratio to be no more than 10% from the 1st of July 2016 onwards, whilst also allowing the government to repay the existing debt at an aggressive pace. This will be achieved through a prudent debt management strategy, which includes the setting aside of approximately $18 million of future debt servicing payments in a restricted sinking fund during the current 2014-15 financial year. A portion of our future debt repayments will therefore come from this fund instead of from our recurrent revenue. Madam Speaker, importantly, no new long-term borrowing is planned during the entire SPS period. Turning to our liability management plan, Madam Speaker, as one would expect from a prudent government, the management of its affairs is not limited to what presently exists. We must also be cognizant of and make plans for how we are going to manage in the future. After all, as one is the primary purpose, after all, Madam Speaker, that is the primary purpose for which we are here today. Much has been said about the future health care and pension liabilities of the public sector, and rightfully so. This government will not bury its head in the sand and pretend that it does not exist. Rather, the government plans to fully ventilate the issue, take ownership of it, and most importantly, do something about it. Since taking office, the government has been making annual contributions of some $11.6 million towards the post-retirement defined benefit plan for civil servants. The $11.6 million contribution is above and beyond the normal 12% pension monthly contribution paid as a percentage of monthly pensionable earnings. The government plans to continue making this $11.6 million annual contribution and have included appropriate provisions to do so in its fiscal plans. In the area of post-retirement health care benefits, the government commissioned an actuarial study on the future impact of the status quo. That is, what will happen if we do nothing and the present regime is allowed to continue and mature. The study considered future potential benefits for civil servants, as well as seamen and veterans, as there are legal, constructive, and moral obligations to provide for these groups. According to the results of the actuarial study, based on what obtains today, the potential future liability of providing for these groups is approximately $1.18 billion. This is predicated on various assumptions, including the rate of inflation for health care costs, the number of individuals who will qualify for these benefits, interest rates, life expectancy, and various other factors, Madam Speaker. What is clear, Madam Speaker, is that something must be done, and done soon. The government is now engaging in discussions and further analysis to determine ways in which current changes will impact the extent of future liability and how best to introduce those changes. As I said, Madam Speaker, the government plans to fully ventilate and take ownership of this issue. It is not a problem that was created overnight, and its solution, likewise, will not be found overnight. That said, the government will not be deterred in finding a solution and will work in a transparent and consultative manner to address this national issue. Madam Speaker, whilst the number is a big number, and I am under no illusions about the manner in which this will be sensationalized, what I can say is that by owning this issue and making plans for it, the Cayman Islands will be much further ahead of many other countries in its fiscal and risk management strategies. With respect to the operating surplus, the government has been criticized for the large operating surpluses in its fiscal plans. However, Madam Speaker, these operating surpluses are necessary to strengthen the government's balance sheet so that when future liabilities, such as those of health care, are settled and recognized, the government will still be in a positive net worth position. In other words, Madam Speaker, through our fiscal planning, we are laying the groundwork to be able to adequately deal with what we know lies ahead. The government should be applauded for having the courage to take this on and to deal with it in a transparent and forthright manner. Madam Speaker, turning to public sector financial reporting. The government came under much criticism recently when it sought to lift up and encourage 3 Caymanian public sector certified public accountants who who achieved improved results on the audit of their respective 2013-14 annual accounts. Some people were quick on their calculators to point out that this was only 3 out of 42 agencies, and so that meant that only 7% had received a favorable audit. Madam Speaker, just 4 short years ago, the Auditor General issued disclaimers of opinion on 10 or almost 25% of the public sector reporting agencies, and only about 1 in 3 or 33% received a clean or unqualified opinion. Today, I am pleased to report to this Honourable House that according to statistics provided by the Office of the Auditor General, as at the 31st of October 2014, the Audit Office had completed 23 of the 42 audits for agencies of the public sector. Of the 23 agencies completed, 16 or 70% received a clean or unqualified opinion, and 7 or 30% received a qualified opinion. No disclaimer of opinion has been issued. Now, Madam Speaker, compare that to where we were just 4 years ago, and I believe that you will agree that we have been achieving real progress. Madam Speaker, as the Minister with constitutional responsibility for finance, I fully recognize and accept my role in ensuring that public finances are planned, utilized, and accounted for in a prudent manner. I will not shy away from holding people accountable when they fail to meet these requirements. Nor, Madam Speaker, will I be deterred in encouraging and recognizing people when they work hard and achieve good results. The government will therefore continue to encourage and support the talent we have in the public sector and work hand in hand to provide the resources that will improve public sector reporting to the point where full accountability is provided to the people of the Cayman Islands in a timely manner. In conclusion, Madam Speaker, the outlook for the Cayman Islands is one of renewed optimism and confidence. In its first financial year in office, the government exceeded expectations for its operating surplus and closing cash balances. In its second year, it sought to bring some relief to the economy through reduced taxes and improved incentives for small businesses. In its third year, the government will seek to bring relief to civil service workers who have been struggling with pay stagnation for 8 years. The 2 primary pillars of our economy remain vibrant, with growing stayover tourism and a flourishing financial services industry. Overall, the economy is forecast to have moderate to sustainable growth, and unemployment is expected to fall below 5% over the next 3 financial years. Madam Speaker, a country without goals is like a ship on the ocean without a destination. This progressives-led government is committed to the goals of a stronger economy, improved public safety, a healthy society, and a culture of good governance. This strategic plan makes key provisions for the achievement of these goals. It allocates resources for the continued support of our tourism and financial services industries, education, and our law enforcement agencies. It also outlines strategies that will lead to job creation in the private sector and improve opportunities for Caymanians. Importantly, Madam Speaker, it shows the government returning to a position of compliance with all key principles of responsible financial management as set out in the Public Management and Finance Law 2013 revision. This return to a position of compliance is consistent with the medium-term fiscal strategy that the Progressives-led government agreed with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in August of 2013. That plan is on track, on schedule, and on target. Madam Speaker, it is said that a dream is just a dream but a goal is a dream with a plan and a deadline. This government is privileged to lead a great team of people. We are not without dreams. However, what differentiates us is a credible plan for the achievement of those dreams. A main goal of this administration was the restoration of public finances. This strategic policy statement shows that the plans laid by the Progressives-led government to achieve that goal is coming to fruition, and that the country is poised to realize the dreams of restored public finances and the other benefits that flow thereafter, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Statements by honorable members and ministers of the cabinet.
There are no statements for this morning.
Government business, motions, suspension of Standing Order 24-5 to enable two government motions to be dealt with at this meeting.
I recognize the Honorable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move the suspension of Standing Order 24-5 to enable two government motions. Motion number 3 of 2014-15, the strategic policy statement, the adoption of the strategic policy statement for the 2015-2016 financial year, and government motion number 4 of 2014-15, entitled the Development and Planning Law 2011 Revision and the Development and Planning Amendment Regulations 2014.
The question is that Standing Order 24-5 be hereby suspended to allow the two government motions to be dealt with at this meeting. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, no.
No.
I believe the ayes have it. Accordingly, Standing Order 24-5 is hereby suspended.
Government motion number 3 of 2014-15, the strategic policy statement for the 2015-2016 financial year to be moved by the Premier, the Honourable Minister of Home and Community Affairs.
I recognize the Honourable Premier.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move government motion number 3 of 2014-15, entitled the Strategic Policy Statement for the 2015-2016 financial year. Whereas Section 23, subsection 1 of the Public Management and Finance Law 2013 revision states that a strategic policy statement for the next financial year shall be presented to the Legislative Assembly by a member of the Cabinet appointed by the Cabinet to do so on their behalf for approval within 2 months. And if the Legislative Assembly has not within that period resolved to approve, amend, or reject the statement, it shall be deemed to be approved. And whereas the government has now prepared and presented its strategic policy statement for the 2015-2016 financial year, be it now therefore resolved that the Legislative Assembly approves the policy priorities, aggregate financial targets, and financial allocations set out in the 2015-2016 strategic policy statement as the indicative parameters on which the 2015-2016 budget is to be formulated.
The motion has been duly moved and is open for debate. Does the Honourable Premier wish to speak to his motion?
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this motion seeks the approval of this Honourable House for the government's 2015-2016 strategic policy statement, which the Minister of Finance and Economic Development has just tabled and ably spoken to, and outlines this administration's key fiscal priorities and broad strategic outcomes for the Cayman Islands. It also puts forth the government's financial targets for the next 3 financial years, covering the period 1st July 2015 to 30th of June 2018. Madam Speaker, when I stood before this Honorable House a year ago to move a similar motion seeking the approval of this House for the 2014-2015 Strategic Policy Statement, it was with hand on heart and prayer in the air that this government would succeed in meeting the objectives set forth in that document. I believe we have, Madam Speaker, in the main, so far delivered on our pledges and continue to make strides to keep the Cayman Islands on a steady and upward course. Madam Speaker, through this statement, it is our intention to let the House and the general public know of government's broad budgetary policies. While the strategic policy statement is not as detailed as the annual budget, it is meant to be used for medium-term planning purposes. In reviewing Cayman's financial outlook for the next projected budget year and further into the future, we see a positive outlook with continued fiscal restraint, which is necessary in the short term. We are poised for compliance, prepared to maintain a declining debt balance while increasing our cash balances. Once again, I compliment the Minister of Finance and the team for their hard work. I also commend everyone in government for restraining their budgetary requests for fiscal year 2015-2016. Their understanding of our need for fiscal prudence meant they did not bring all of their wants to the table. And while it would be my desire to give everyone everything they want, it just isn't possible. I have to stress that the 2015-2016 budget year is crucial to government, as we have to comply with all framework for fiscal responsibility ratios, and come December 2015, we must legally comply with the mandated cash days ratio of 90 days. As the Minister of Finance has said, we forecast cash days to be 96.3 in the 2015-2016 budget year and increasing to 202.6 days in the forecasted 2017-2018 budget. While the upcoming fiscal year is crucial, Madam Speaker, I should note that we are facing some early budget pressures in the current year. As usual, we have already exceeded the current budget we set for dealing with refugees, as it is an unpredictable area. Add to that the more than $5 million made in concessions and waivers from the previous administration, and you realize we still face some fiscal challenges. But there is good news, Madam Speaker. Our managed vacancy program is working with early savings noted in personnel costs, and the government will retain positive cash outcomes throughout the fiscal year, meaning we will not require an overdraft facility. Revenues of $5 million collected in the first quarter from annual permanent residence work permit fees are already $2.1 million more than the full budget year projections. More good news, Madam Speaker, is that Cayman Airways and the Port Authority are two statutory authorities that are reporting positive early results. We've also recorded a $2.7 million positive variance in stamp duty on land transfers for the first quarter. Things are getting better, Madam Speaker. As the Minister of Finance has said, based on the economic performance for 2013 and the first 6 months of 2014, estimated GDP growth for year-end 2013-14 stands at 1.6%, while the forecast for year-end 2014-15 remains at 2.1%. Madam Speaker, these growth rates are the strongest estimated so far for the country during the post-2008 global financial crisis period. We've seen economic growth in wholesale and retail trade, hotels and restaurants, transport, storage and communication, real estate, renting and business activities, and construction. Because we are fiscally prudent, we project overall revenue of $661,224,000 for the 2015-16 budget year, up from the $648,107 $648,172,000 unaudited figure in the 2013-14 budget. We are forecasting to grow the economy year on year with government revenues expected of some $672,205,000 in the 2016-17 fiscal year and $703,993,000 in fiscal year 2017-18. Additionally, Madam Speaker, because of the outstanding operating performance in 2013-14, government's closing cash balance for that fiscal year was $10.9 million higher than originally budgeted. Because of this, the Progressives-led administration was determined in the 2014-15 fiscal year to relieve some of the heavy pressures being borne by the local economy and decided to reduce the cost of doing business in the Cayman Islands. As we all know, Madam Speaker, the private sector is the engine that drives the economy. And so, Madam Speaker, since we've taken office, we have reduced the import duty on diesel fuel imported to Caribbean Utilities Company, and we reduced import duty to licensed traders by 2 percentage points to 20% at a cost of some $4 million in projected lost revenues. Madam Speaker, I hasten to remind everyone that the reduction in import duty for diesel fuel imported by Caribbean Utilities Companies will take effect on the 1st of January next year. In addition, Madam Speaker, we have reduced the duty on building materials to 15% from as high as 22% for some items. We've removed the import duty on critical ingredients for local bakeries. We've amended the customs tariffs law to give a duty rate of 10% to electric motorcycles and electric segways, the same rate as for electric cars, and a 15% duty on hybrid motorcycles, the same rate for hybrid cars. We have, Madam Speaker, implemented a series of changes to trade and business licensing fees as an incentive to support the creation and development of new businesses. Businesses with 10 or fewer employees are being permitted to pay their annual license fee in quarterly installments instead of the typical one-time full payment. So, Madam Speaker, we have been looking after the private sector. But while we are taking care of the private sector, Madam Speaker, we are also working internationally to woo investment in and further shore up our financial services industry. The government, through the Ministry with responsibility for financial services, commerce, and investment, will seek to partner with Cayman Finance to carry out a jurisdictional branding exercise to further promote the financial services industry. That ministry, Madam Speaker, will also review and propose changes to the liquor licensing law, the trade and business licensing law, and the local companies control license law. The government will also commence review work on the development of a legislative framework to deter anti-competitive practices by businesses operating in the Cayman Islands. To ensure the continued competitiveness of our jurisdiction, significant work continues to be done to modernize the intellectual property legislation relating to patents, trademarks, and copyright. Madam Speaker, Miguel de Cervantes tells us in his novel Don Quixote that the proof of the pudding is in the eating. In Cayman, the proof that the Progressives-led administration is living up to its promises of restoring stability to the country is in our continuing good stewardship of the country and fiscal prudence. And Madam Speaker, it is because of this fiscal prudence that I can announce today that this government intends to give the civil service a 4% cost of living adjustment starting in the 2015-2016 financial year. This government did not want to give less than the 3.2% taken from the civil service by the previous administration. In fact, we would have liked to have given more. But, Madam Speaker, this is all we can afford at present. Madam Speaker, the previous cost of living adjustment of 3.2% afforded to civil servants adjusted their salaries for inflation up to 2008 levels at that time. When the previous elected government reversed that adjustment, civil servants' salaries reverted back to their 2006 inflation-adjusted levels. Since 2006, inflation has grown by 11%. That means the present purchasing power of civil servants is approximately 11% less in today's dollars than what they were 8 years ago in 2006. Additionally, Madam Speaker, at that time, the government placed a ban on all within grade salary increases, placed restrictions on the payment of duty and acting allowances, and stipulated that employees who reach the retirement age and are rehired under fixed-term contracts be placed at point 1 of their salary scales. This resulted in a pay decrease of up to 26% for some civil servants. Madam Speaker, statistics compiled show that more than half of all civil servants earn below $3,333 per month. And it should not go without note, Madam Speaker, that 3 out of 4 employees working for the civil service are Caymanians. This situation has caused a fall in the living standards for many Caymanian families who have chosen to serve their country through a career in the civil service. And whilst it may not bode well for retirement security, Madam Speaker, the truth of the matter is that Caymanians have a relatively higher propensity to spend. This means a huge percentage of the income earned is not stashed away in a savings account. Rather, it is recirculated within the economy for the purchase of goods and services. So the fiscal and economic impact of this cost of living adjustment is not isolated to the single line of personnel cost on the government financials. Rather, economic analysis proves that an increase in worker take-home pay will naturally lead to an increase in government revenue from increased consumption, an increase in employment as a result of demand for more services, a reduction in the demand for social benefits as families are able to afford more on their own, an increase in construction as families are better able to qualify for mortgages or afford home improvements, and also proves to be a highly effective means of dispersing economic stimulus. Madam Speaker, perhaps the argument could be expanded to say that the government, like the private sector, is subject to the same pressures of inflation. Therefore, the ability to keep government expenditures more or less constant while giving this increase is a result of increasing efficiency. Madam Speaker, notwithstanding the planned cost of living adjustment, the government's fiscal plan shows marked improvement in several key indicators of fiscal health within the public sector. Our dedicated civil servants have gone far too long without pay increases their friends and colleagues have enjoyed over the years in the private sector. And this government, Madam Speaker, believes it is time for them to get their due. As you know, Madam Speaker, this strategic policy statement is the first step in preparing our annual budget. The main points of government's fiscal strategy are prudent fiscal management, facilitation of private sector economic growth, an educated and work-ready populace, and development and modernization of Cayman's infrastructure. This government remains dedicated to transparent and prudent fiscal management with the key objects of complying with all principles of the framework for fiscal responsibility. We have, Madam Speaker, developed a set of broad outcomes early on in office to guide our work during this term. They are a strong, thriving, and increasingly diverse economy, a work-ready and globally competitive workforce, a more secure community, a more efficient, accessible, and affordable public service, modern, smart infrastructure, a fit and healthy population, a center of excellence in education, a culture of good governance, sustainable developments in Cayman Brac and Little Cayman with sensitivity to the island's unique characteristics, conservation of our biological diversity, and ecologically sustainable development, a robust agriculture sector suited to the needs and resources of the country, and equity and justice in a society that values the contributions of all. And so, Madam Speaker, speaking to the first of those broad principles, a strong, thriving, and increasingly diverse economy, this administration continues to find unique ways to diversify Cayman's economy because we all know that our economic wealth drives every aspect of the society. We have several ongoing and proposed construction projects and plans are on track for the cruise ship berthing facility, Owen Roberts International Airport terminal upgrades, Georgetown revitalization, East-West Arterial Road extension, and the new solid waste management facility. Over the course of this upcoming financial year, Madam Speaker, the government will invest $5 million towards its efforts to revitalize Georgetown and improve the experience for residents and visitors. This will include the provision of an enhanced transportation network that supports connectivity to major traffic arteries. New employment is expected to be created directly and indirectly from these projects. Other ways in which government will implement a strong, thriving, and increasingly diverse economy include an improvement to the public transport system by completing public restrooms and introducing seating at the Georgetown bus depot and increasing taxi, tour, and omnibus permits, and extending operating hours for taxi and omnibus operators. Madam Speaker, we have given 40 new taxi and 15 omnibus licenses to Caymanians, meaning we have taken increasing tourism numbers to create jobs, and we've actually been able to deliver new jobs into the economy. We will also implement regulatory framework enhancements for upcoming assessments and reviews by international standard-setting bodies such as the IMF Financial Sector Assessment Program Review in 2017. Government will also continue the preparatory work necessary for the fourth round of mutual evaluation in which the Cayman Islands anti-money laundering counter-terrorist financing framework would be assessed for technical compliance with an effective implementation of international standards as set out in the revised Financial Action Task Force 40 recommendations. The Cayman Islands' fourth mutual evaluation is scheduled for the fourth quarter of 2017. Madam Speaker, we also plan to encourage collaboration between the Cayman Islands Turtle Farm and other local attractions with entities and entrepreneurs in the tourism industry such as tour bus companies, water sports companies, and hotels to offer visitors packages, thereby producing additional positive impact on the island's economy and employment. The Civil Aviation Authority of the Cayman Islands will continue to grow the Cayman Islands Aircraft Registry in what has become a very highly competitive global marketplace. The Civil Aviation Authority endeavors to build smart infrastructural systems to manage regulatory activities with e-initiatives, while maintaining financial self-sustainability and contributing to core government revenues. Government will implement a strategy for marketing new products that can be listed and traded on the Cayman Islands Stock Exchange locally and internationally, in particular, the new rules for shipping and mining companies. Madam Speaker, we also plan to introduce a pilot program offering VIP concierge services for business people to be fast-tracked through immigration and customs when they come into and leave the country. Madam Speaker, the next broad principle is a work-ready and globally competitive workforce. While we are doing all we can to help the private sector create jobs, we are also mindful that the employment issues in Cayman have to do with more than just economic conditions of recent times. There is a growing feeling of dissatisfaction among many Caymanians about their treatment in the labor market. The hiring of capable and willing Caymanians and paying them a good and fair wage for work should not be a matter for debate. Government knows we need to have a workforce skilled for employers' demands. It is crucial not only to Cayman's economy, but in keeping unemployment as low as possible. Through the Ministry of Education, Employment, and Gender Affairs, the government will take the role of a partner and facilitator in the training, development, and employment of Caymanians who are actively seeking employment or career progression. Initiatives planned in this regard include the development of legislation to underpin the National Workforce Development Agency, the implementation of a national apprenticeship program, a national job link program, and the establishment of a national quality assurance framework for training institutions. The government's strategic plan also includes additional financial incentives to attract and retain highly skilled teachers for a school system. The Honourable Minister with responsibility for education and employment will speak more about this initiative in due course. The government will convert the hurricane shelter site on the Bluff in Cayman Brac into a new school campus in its efforts to improve educational facilities throughout the islands. Another measure we have undertaken, Madam Speaker, is the opening of the long-awaited international accredited Cayman Islands School of Hospitality, which opened in September this year with 25 students. It is the government's intention to increase that enrollment to 50 over the course of the next fiscal year. Other actions government will take to ensure a competitive workforce include improving the employability of unskilled or semi-skilled members of the workforce, such as young parents, and recovering addicts by providing programs that increase their job skills and literacy levels, prepare them for suitable careers, and provide therapeutic support as they transition into employment. Madam Speaker, the third broad principle is a more secure community. Of course, government realizes that all the work done to grow the economy, attract investment, and train up our citizens to take up roles of employment will be pointless if we don't pay particular attention to our security in the Cayman Islands. Public safety is a core responsibility of the government and is not something we can outsource to anyone else. We must therefore continue to make smart investments to support our law enforcement agencies and uniform branches. Included in the government's fiscal plans is the purchase of an enhanced communication tower for first responders. Also included are additional funds to improve security at Northwood Prison, thus ensuring we do not fall afoul of our human rights obligations. This is shown as a planned $2 million equity investment to the Ministry of Home Affairs. The progressive-led administration is also prepared to continue to expand the implementation of the crime reduction strategy, considering short as well as medium-term solutions relevant to early intervention, reducing reoffending, and increasing enforcement and situational prevention. We will provide social work and community development services to vulnerable children and families in order to strengthen community ties and build stronger family bonds, as well as systematically restructuring the child protection services offered by the Department of Children and Family Services to ensure compliance with the provisions of the Children Law and regulations. Madam Speaker, there will be an analysis of all public agencies involved with the continuum of care of children and families to develop a comprehensive strategy to proactively address and treat the identified issues, as well as continue to develop and enhance family programs and treatment services to reduce risk factors and increase protective factors and address issues such as trauma, grief, depression and anxiety, substance abuse, or co-occurring disorders, thereby preventing further escalation in crime. The fourth broad principle, Madam Speaker, is a more efficient, accessible, and affordable public service. Madam Speaker, this government continues to see the benefits of making the services it provides easier to obtain and more affordable to the users. By guaranteeing the integrity in the purchase of goods and services by the public sector, as well as value for money, we reduce costs and ensure greater efficiencies in managing government. We will continue to improve and increase e-government services, develop and implement e-filing for other banking, insurance, and fiduciary areas of the Monetary Authority, and implement an electronic filing and payment system for director registration and licensing. And Madam Speaker, I'm happy to be able to announce that we have just appointed our first director of e-services, who will commence work on the 1st of December. Madam Speaker, the fifth broad principle is modern, smart infrastructure. Madam Speaker, because we do plan to grow the economy through increased development and work opportunities, it is vital that government ensures we have the necessary and appropriate infrastructures in place to deal with that growth. One of the challenges of successive governments has been the Georgetown landfill. While we are going through the proper, transparent, and accountable procedures for a long-term solution to solid waste, we are managing the existing site as best we can. Government is buying new equipment as needed, management has been improved, and we are seeing the benefits. Madam Speaker, I'm happy to inform this House that multinational engineering company AMEC has been awarded a consultancy contract to prepare a national strategy to determine the direction of solid waste management in the Cayman Islands for the next 50 years. We remain committed to implementing the first national solid waste management system strategy and the integrated solid waste management system, following proper procurement processes as per the framework for fiscal responsibility. To facilitate that upfront process, the government has allocated $1 million in the immediate 2015-2016 budget and a provisional further million in the following year. Madam Speaker, tourism continues to play a major role in our economic success. The government must therefore take steps to promote and safeguard this industry by ensuring the safety and comfort of our visitors. In this regard, the government will be making a relatively significant investment in the facilities used for air and cruise arrivals. The government has allocated $5.5 million towards the further development of a cruise berthing facility in Georgetown. However, the government remains resolute in its efforts to ensure the cruise berthing project delivers value for money, and most importantly, that any action taken will not have a disastrous effect on our environment. The $5.5 million investment will ensure those criteria are met. Recent increases in our overnight visitors have provided a tremendous boost to the local economy. However, complacency is a luxury we cannot afford. The Owen Roberts International Airport has served us well for 30 years, but it is now reaching its maximum capacity. As the facility that provides the first and last impression for our stayover guests, it is critically important that the government moves swiftly to improve the airport and in so doing, better our tourism product. To continue to ensure the necessary and appropriate infrastructure is in place, government remains committed to investigating the possibility of introducing a landfill tipping fee for waste brought in from private companies and citizens. This would include a review and subsequent amendments to the public health regulations. We will review the management and operation of cemeteries and possibly implement appropriate legislation as necessary and develop a strategic plan to diversify the sources of energy available to the Grand Cayman electrical grid in a manner that stabilizes and hopefully reduces energy costs longer term and potentially creates a vibrant new business sector. Government plans to reduce groundwater infiltration by using a CCTV system to identify and repair sewer mains and rehabilitate manholes and extend the existing wastewater collection system into Governor's Harbor and connecting all residents in that area to the public sewerage system. We also intend to create distinct zones for the Water Authority, whereby the net inflow can be compared against water sales to strategically identify problem areas within the distribution system and reduce non-revenue water. As you can appreciate, Madam Speaker, an efficient transportation network is essential for the economic development of a country. It saves the commuting public time and money, improves the efficiency of land use, and facilitates commerce through the movement of customers and supplies. The government's planned expansion of the Linford-Pearson Highway and improvement of various arteries around the Georgetown area will be augmented by private sector efforts to extend the East-West Arterial Highway and further develop the eastern districts. An investment of approximately $27 million to the Ministry of Planning, Lands and Agriculture, Housing and Infrastructure over the next 3 financial years will be used to execute the planned improvements and expansions, which include completing the widening of the Linford-Pearson Highway from Bobby Thompson Way to Crew Road, completing the widening of Godfrey Nixon Way from the Estella Tibbetts Highway to Eastern Avenue, and completing the widening of Smith Road from Huldah Avenue to Hospital Road. Madam Speaker, the sixth principle is a fit and healthy population. While aiding the private sector in creating jobs, growing the economy, and ensuring infrastructure is in place to meet our growing demands, if we didn't have individual quality of life through health and fitness, all would be for naught, Madam Speaker. Government can't legislate health and well-being, but it can be a model to its citizens. I commend the men and women in the civil service who I see taking exercise on a weekly basis via their walking club. To help our society to get or remain fit and healthy, the government will continue to develop and enhance family programs and treatment services to reduce risk factors, increase protective factors, and address issues such as trauma, grief, depression, anxiety, substance abuse, or co-occurring disorders, thereby improving the health and well-being of society. The government will promote and conduct public education on the community's responsibility toward the elderly and disabled to improve and strengthen their quality of life, as well as develop action plans for the implementation of the national sports policy. We will also continue to review and improve facilities where required to meet the needs of the community, as well as foster and promote sports tourism and work with national sports associations to develop strategic plans to improve the quality and increase the quantity of physical education in schools in line with long-term athlete development principles. The seventh principle, Madam Speaker, is a center of excellence in education. The Progressives-led government is committed to continuing to develop a world-class education system that positions our children and young people for success in further learning, employment, and life. One of the projects government will continue to support is the continued construction of the John Gray High School. Whilst there is a significant cost element attached, the government strongly believes that an educational environment rich in opportunities to increase workforce readiness is a worthy use of public resources. We are a first world country, and our children deserve a first-class education system that is conducive to effective learning. Therefore, we will invest in the future leaders of these islands by providing the proper developmental infrastructure that offers them the best opportunity for future success. In this regard, Madam Speaker, the government has allocated approximately $6 million to the Ministry of Education, Employment, and Gender Affairs to continue with the construction of the new John Gray High School in phases and to carry out other minor capital works. In addition, we are prepared to develop and initiate a new legislative framework for education with full implementation of the national curriculum and introduce an enhanced government model for education which creates new levels of partnership with parents, the community, and the private sector with more devolved responsibilities and greater accountability among all stakeholders. Government will fully implement the Cayman Islands Early Childhood Curriculum Framework and the Education Council Guidelines for Early Childhood Care and Education Centers 2013 and continue to implement the response to intervention approach to support the most at-risk students. We will formalize and implement a public-private partnership strategy for the reopening of the historic Georgetown Library building as a cultural center and promote and grow the School for Hospitality Studies. We plan to expand the curriculum of the Cayman Islands Law School to introduce an LLM degree program in international finance, law, and regulation in order to further enhance the school's already stellar track record as a reputable institution for tertiary education. The National Gallery will be maintained as a leading education facility and resource in the Cayman Islands and assist in the establishment of secondary and tertiary level arts education in the Cayman Islands in order to encourage the development of local artists. The seventh principle, Madam Speaker, is a culture of good governance. Madam Speaker, as we have matured into a modern society, the demands on our court system have also substantially increased. Continued growth in our financial services sector and our various service offerings creates complex legal matters requiring significant court resources. Further, the enactment of various good governance laws such as the Freedom of Information, the Children's Law, the Anti-Corruption Law, and the Bill of Rights has likewise served to increase the work of our judiciary. Justice delayed is justice denied, and presently our judicial facilities are inadequate to provide timely adjudication of various matters coming before the courts. Increasingly, citizens are waiting months and in some instances, years for matters to be dealt with by the courts. For several years, the Honorable Chief Justice has been asking for the provision of a new court facility to improve the efficiency of the judiciary. In this strategic policy statement, the government has allocated $200,000 to start the process, which will include a detailed business case and a subsequent procurement process in line with the FFR. A portion of the funding for this construction is expected to come from the existing Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty Fund. Forfeiture Fund. Other measures government will take, Madam Speaker, over this fiscal year include the development of a travel policy for all ministers and members of the cabinet and for statutory authorities and government-owned companies. As well, Madam Speaker, as moving to develop a national plan, Vision 2030, as a strategic blueprint for the sustainable development of these islands. The quality of government's media services will be enhanced by increasing local content, improving news content across platforms toward building listeners' connection to Radio Cayman and increasing reporting on all aspects of government in collaboration with Government Information Services and Cayman Islands Government TV. We will also encourage more community engagement by increasing opportunities for people in the districts to interact with Radio Cayman and improve sponsorship of programs in addition to spot advertising to help pay for public programming. The government will continue strengthening of the Department of Labor and Pensions so as to provide more effective and efficient mechanisms for managing compliance and enforcement of private sector pension and labor matters. And we support the finalization and facilitate the effective implementation of new amendments to the labor law, the national pensions law, the pensions investment regulations, and the general regulations, as well as facilitate the work of the Minimum Wage Advisory Committee. Through the Monetary Authority, we will formalize regularly scheduled meetings with key private sector groups such as Cayman Finance, AIMA, CISPA, the Bankers Association, Insurance Managers Association, STEP, and the Directors Association. The eighth principle, Madam Speaker, is sustainable developments in Cayman Brac and Little Cayman with sensitivity to the island's unique characteristics. Madam Speaker, you are keenly aware of government's desire to see Cayman Brac and Little Cayman grow and thrive. I enjoy my time spent on the sister islands, and I understand well the need for jobs and a stronger economy. There is some good news for the economy on the Brac with the weekly visit of a four-masted 16-sail ship that carries around 150 passengers. Not only will the visits expose new people to the sister islands, but it will also stimulate the economy and could provide incentive to further develop the Brac tourism product. To ensure the sister islands are sustainably developed, government plans to complete the fourth changing room at the facility, the track and swimming pool at the Cayman Brac Sports Complex to encourage sports tourism, as well as complete works to convert the Bluff Hurricane Shelter into a new Cayman Brac School campus, as I've already mentioned. On the Brac, also, we will improve scheduled Cayman Airways limited air service using large turboprop aircraft and complete the terminal expansion at the Charles Colonel International Airport to allow for international flights into Cayman Brac. As for other infrastructure, the government will continue the installation of various size water mains along the north coast from West End Crossroads to the district administration building and continue work on the bluff site to carry out preliminary hydrogeological investigations to construct a new water production, storage, and distribution facility. The ninth principle, Madam Speaker, is the conservation of our biological diversity and ecologically sustainable development. If we are to maintain the Cayman Islands as a pristine and sought-after tourist and investor destination, we have to ensure that our biological diversity and ecology are sustained while development continues. Our Cayman turtle farm and mosquito-borne diseases have both made headlines in the recent past, and to that end, government will continue researching optimal control methods for the Aedes aegypti, the vector for dengue fever and chikungunya, and contribute to the conservation of sea turtles in the wild around the Cayman Islands by resuming annual releases of turtles as soon as the appropriate tests and sample collections are completed. The ninth principle, Madam Speaker, is a robust agriculture sector suited to the needs and resources of the country. Just as all of those previously mentioned items are strategic to a successful government, economy, and country, so too is agriculture. Government will develop the National Food and Nutrition Security Policy and Strategic Plan 2016, develop a land lease to farmers policy, and seek to host the Caribbean Week of Agriculture in 2016. Principle 10, Madam Speaker, is equity and justice in a society that values the contributions of all. Madam Speaker, everything government is proposing also depends on strong families and communities throughout the Cayman Islands. We have a passion to make a positive difference now and for future generations by ensuring that human development is a national priority. Madam Speaker, there are presently over 100 students at the Lighthouse School, which caters to children with special needs. These are our children, and they will one day grow into adults. The government has a moral responsibility to ensure that there are appropriate facilities to deal with the growing population of adults with special needs. Included in the SPS is a provision of approximately $8.5 million over 2 years for the construction of a proper mental health facility. This facility, when built, will also facilitate vocational training and support services for adults with special needs. Government plans to finalize the Cayman Islands disability policy and its implementation planning, ensuring that the needs of disabled persons in our communities are met by amending or implementing legislation and enhancing infrastructure. We plan a new Sunrise Center facility using a public-private partnership arrangement, which will commence construction in financial year 2016-17 and be completed in 2017-18. The new Sunrise Center will provide continued vocational training and support services for adults with disabilities. Also in the works are a National Register of Persons with Disabilities, a National Resource Center for Persons with Disabilities, and the creation and operation of a National Council for Persons with Disabilities with a supporting secretariat to champion disability interests. We'll also develop a public education campaign to promote the inclusion of persons with disabilities and provide supported living programs for persons with disabilities to ensure the achievement of the highest level of independence possible. Madam Speaker, government will also develop a national policy on the elderly and advocate for legislation or resources required to ensure the rights of the elderly are protected and their needs are addressed in our community, and undertake a collaborative research project on gender issues in education, in particular the underperformance of boys and young men in the education system. We will continue to work towards extension of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women to the Cayman Islands, and promote gender equality and provide awareness of the gender equality law and CEDAW through training and communications. Government will also implement the National Youth Policy and construct youth development indicators to lead data-driven strategies for youth development. Madam Speaker, This strategic policy statement keeps us on the path we began in May 2013 of long-term fiscal responsibility. It also sets forth our very clear policy objectives that are aimed at ensuring a strong, stable, and healthy Cayman society for generations to come. We are keenly aware of our need to develop, but we are even more cognizant that the development we seek and welcome must not leave our people behind or harm our environment. The Progressives-led administration will continue to push the country forward. We will continue to aim high, for our people deserve no less. We are committed to all that we have put forth in this strategic policy statement, and I ask all honorable members of this Legislative Assembly for their support of Government Motion Number 3 of 2014-15, which seeks the approval of the 2015-2016 Strategic Policy Statement. I thank you, Madam Speaker.
We will now take the luncheon break and reconvene at 2 p.m.